Um, I have spent much of my career thinking about Black people, not people of color, not diversity, not Black people in comparison to white people, but just the lives of Black people and trying to understand the ways in which they thrive in spite of fill in the blank. Um, More recently, though, my work has turned to thinking about anti-Blackness and racism more directly, and feeling like I need to hold these systems accountable in order to understand the possibility of Black liberation and the ability of Black people to thrive. And most recently, related to that notion of thriving, I've been thinking a lot about the future and possibilities. So today, I thought I would share my thoughts and progress about how we get to a point where we can be more imaginative about who we are as a people. So when we think about anti-Blackness, we're really thinking about the ways in which we have these embedded assumptions of Black inferiority. Often when we're interpreting or analyzing racial patterns that we're observing in society, there's this underlying and sometimes explicit assumption that the status of Black people in society is the result of their cultural, moral, or biological failings. Which by proxy assumes that the status of white people in society is the result of their culture and moral successes, which sounds a lot like white supremacy. And this, after all, is the fundamental function of race, the construct that was created to create notions of inferiority and superiority that centered whiteness. And as Dr. Crawford pointed out, the myth of white superiority. And in fact, several of my colleagues, one colleague in particular, Ruha Benjamin, talks about race as a technology, as a tool that's been used to create division in social status. In general, we are deeply invested in a framework of Black inferiority. We've used this framework to ground our very economic systems, our cultural and political ideologies, etc. And what I've come to is that accepting the truth and reality of the Black experience doesn't really reveal anything about Blackness or Black inferiority, but rather it reveals something about whiteness as a tool, and more specifically, white toxicity. When we talk about, analyze, and address racism, we are inevitably grounding this in whiteness, not Blackness. So what does whiteness mean? How do we hold it accountable in these systems? Part of that's required is making this explicit and visible. In 2018, as was mentioned, I led the creation of a virtual reality experience that places you in the shoes of a Black male as a child and adolescent and as an adult. And the experience was called A Thousand Cut Journey. We were interested in whether taking on the perspective of a Black male may enhance the ways in which people understand what racism is and how it functions. When I created this piece, it was a decided shift, a conscious shift away from my focus on Blackness to focusing on whiteness, and to at least temporarily hold whiteness accountable. So even though we're putting you into the shoes of a Black man, we are ultimately showing you not something about a Black experience, we're showing you something about whiteness and anti-Black racism. A lot of this work was grounded in the notion that white people don't understand racism. That's more than something that's grounded in my very valid personal experience, but it's also clearly empirically grounded as well. And when I say don't understand, I mean a number of things. Don't listen, willfully ignore, opt out of acknowledging, actively dismiss, reduce to a problem of the past, believe it's an exaggeration, not wanting to feel uncomfortable or relinquish privilege or power or status in any way.
Dr. Cogburn, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to let you know we can't see your slides.
Can you see them now?
Not yet.
Okay.
Great.
Can you see them now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't know that.
That's right.
So when I say don't understand, I'm talking about a number of different aspects of this phenomenon. And when I created A Thousand Cut Journey in particular, I was thinking about white liberal audiences. And it was a response to this tendency among white liberals to intellectualize and pontificate about racism, to invest in symbols of equality without really sacrificing anything, without truly repairing anything, without actually investing in pathways that lead to different possibilities. And the response to this has often been, well, aren't you preaching to the choir? And so I present to you very clearly here a white choir to make it obvious that yes, I'm speaking to a group of people who have a lot of work to do as it relates to this work. I just want to go back so you can see some of the images of the virtual reality experience. So again, embedding you in these different points of view as a Black male, as a child, adolescent, and as an adult experiencing racism in different ways. But again, not putting you in a Black experience, but instead helping you to view and visualize the function of whiteness in society. So in this work, I was deliberately trying to improve and enhance a group of people's understanding of what racism is and how it functions in society. It was grounded in this notion that we had to make progress in this understanding. We had to have a better collective grounding in the realities of racism in order to be better equipped to imagine what the solutions may be. And I still hold true to this. I think that this is important, but it also roots us in thinking about problems and fixing problems, when I also think it's important for us to imagine ways of moving forward. How do we move on? So I have some bits of information, things that I've learned over the past several years that I think are important in order for us to move forward. One, we're stuck in a loop. We're stuck in this loop where I and others are in this hamster wheel of an existence of trying to explain what racism is, the very basics of what it is in society, and often having to respond to calls, prove to me, show me the data, in spite of thousands of studies, and then just looking outside of your window and paying attention, being there for your consumption. Teach me, tell me what to do. A lack of agency and investment in one's own progress and growth. This notion of now more than ever, this has been a common refrain that's talked about in the text Black Futures since the death of George Floyd, where there's this shock and awe that this is where we live, that this is the country in which we live. Black people and other oppressed people are not at all surprised that this is where we live. And yet there's this common refrain among white people in particular of shock that this is where we live. And this continued investment in this intellectual exercise. Let's keep talking, let's keep reading, let's keep imagining all the possibilities of this, let's keep considering all the different empirical iterations that we could produce to demonstrate what is fundamental to the grounding of our country, the creation of our country, and that this is also a global phenomenon of anti-Blackness and the function of racism in our society. We have to break out of this loop. We have to break out of an investment of repeating these things over and over and over again. And some core assumptions that I make in doing this work. One is that we must not only accept and understand the global realities of racism, we must accept and understand the global realities of anti-Blackness in particular, and the ways in which anti-Blackness is inextricably tied to whiteness. We must center the most oppressed among us in order to stand any chance of reaching human liberation and social transformation. Not for Black people, but for all of us. I will assume in this talk that you have done the work to accept the truth of who we are and who you are, and who we have been and who you have been, and who we and you will inevitably continue to be without racial transformation. And if you have not done that work, start there and then come back to this recording and listen to my remarks again. In order to reach liberation, we will find it at the intersections of oppression, and when freedom is lived at the intersections of oppression. So again, we're thinking about the most marginalized groups in society. We're thinking about Black, women, trans, in a spectrum of physical and neural abilities, in thinking about how do we actually reach some notion of human liberation. So in thinking about imagination, I want to honor today's focus, which was not only to recognize the impact of racism and white toxicity, but to also work toward change, to imagine a different future. Today, my hope is that we will join together not to describe and fix problems in fundamentally flawed structures and cultures, but in reimagining, thinking again about who it is we want to be, and truly believing that it's possible to get there. I don't pretend to have any clear answers to these questions. The freedom to imagine this possibility is something that I've only recently claimed myself. Again, I focused most of my career on describing the problem of racism. But my call today is a shift in focus and purpose and what we believe is possible. And I've been inspired by a number of voices in this space who are also imagining and who are invested in a process of accountability and collective transformation. One is the author and activist Miriam Kaba, who says, we'll figure it out by working to get there. Again, no one has a playbook. No one has an exact list of things that we need to do in order to move in this direction. But there is a need for a collective investment in imagining something different, not just placing bandages on old problems, but acknowledging those problems and holding true to a bigger vision, a bigger set of values for who we want to be as a society. And ultimately, if in order to build tomorrow, we have to see it. We spend way too much time trying to prove that racism exists, responding to confusion and delusion about the realities of the societies that we live in. We have to move on. We can't keep spending our time and brain power on the problem of describing this issue, but should rather be invested in moving forward. There's something called pragmatic utopianism that really refers to starting where we are, but imagining where we want to be. I have no delusion that we just get to start with a blank slate. Dr. Crawford likes to use the phrase tabula rasa, that we get to erase all of this and start all over and build from the ground up. We have to grapple with the realities of the systems that we live in and operate in today. But we also have to, in that fight and struggle for equity, imagine who we actually want to be and not just try and scrub ourselves clean of of our original sins around racism and anti-Blackness to think about where we want to go next. So thank you, and I look forward to our conversation.